Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast, a podcast to give families a new point of support as they navigate the NICU journey. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful. Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast. Our guest today is Darcy Walker Krause. She is the founder and CEO of Grieve to Thrive, LLC. Darcy received her Juris Doctor from Duke University School of Law in 2004. After practicing labor and employment law for 5 years, Darcy returned to school and received her master's in social work in 2012 from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. Since that time, Darcy has dedicated herself to providing grief education and support. In this capacity, Darcy was the executive director of Uplift Center for Grieving Children in the city of Philadelphia for approximately 10 years, overseeing transformational organizational growth and change. She has been actively involved with the National Alliance for Children's Grief, serving on the board of directors for the last 6 years and serving as secretary, vice president, and president of the board. She's currently a member of the NACG President's Circle, working in an advisory capacity to the CEO. In her current role at Grieve to Thrive, Darcy provides portfolio-based grief services, including expert witness testimony, grief workshop facilitation, corporate presentations on grief-informed work culture, and nonprofit management consulting. Welcome, Darcy. You have a lot going on.
I do, Martha. It keeps things interesting, you know.
Well, I have love. We have been friends for a long time. You've known my husband for a long time. We have known each other. Our paths have crossed at different points throughout our careers. But I'm so happy to have you on the NICU Today podcast. And I think the work that you are doing right now is so relevant to the audiences we serve through the NICU experience, not only families who go through the NICU, but also families who experience child loss. But I want to ask you, how did you get into this area, supporting families going through grief?
Yeah. Well, like you, Martha, this comes from a personal place for me. When I was 15 years old, my mother died suddenly, and I found myself unmoored and trying to find my way from adolescence into adulthood. And I did that for a while and started to realize that I'd had some people who helped me along the way. I had a teacher who stepped in, who had gotten me with a therapist, who had taught me coping mechanisms that allowed me to thrive. But as I moved into adulthood, I started to realize that there were a lot of kids out there, adults out there who had lost parents when they were younger, who were still really struggling. And so I started to look into, how do I work in this field? How do I help give back what was given to me when I lost my mom, when people really stepped in and helped me out? And I decided to leave the law and to go back and get my master's in social work, and really haven't turned back since. Grief is something that I'm passionate about, both from a personal perspective, in helping people understand and really honor grief and not judge it, and allowing us to move through all the feelings and things that we experience.
How did you, and thank you for sharing your story. I don't have the words for you. I can only imagine losing my mother at such a young age. How did you navigate through that grief yourself of losing your mom at that time?
Well, it's funny because there's the grief at that time and the grief over the long arc of my life, right? So when it happened at 15, honestly, it was just getting up every day and kind of moving through that day. I mean, really day to day, trying to do what I could. Giving myself grace, I think, is something that I learned pretty early on, so that I didn't judge myself, so that I could kind of restart the next day. And honestly, I really was a teacher who came in and she mentored me. She really showed me love. I mean, we're still in touch to this day. She's just one of those special people, and she made a major difference for me. And in giving me that love and that support, alongside with my grandparents, my mom's parents, I was very close with until for a long time with them. That really helped me have that support that I needed to get through it. But then there's the long arc. I think one thing that we always forget about is that there are different developmental points. And this applies to any kind of grief. You'll be experiencing it over a long time. It's not something that is finite and has an ending. And so I think that we just have to experience it as it comes. So I think whenever I graduated high school, whenever I graduated college, whenever I got married, whenever I had a child, whenever I had any sort of significant loss that was going on in my own life outside of the actual loss of my mother, each of those was another experience of having to process and experience and sometimes re-experience that loss of not having her in that moment. And I think that's something that we don't always expect, but I always try to make sure that people are prepared for. And it's healthy and it's okay. And it's something that this is normal. I mean, and I think making people realize that this is something that we just over time will have an experience throughout our lives. And so I think that for me, though, really learning to how to cope, how to give myself the space to have grief bursts and cry and just really feel my feelings whenever they came up. That was really important for me, and still continues to be.
It is, and we say all the time, you can cry anytime you want. Today is a good day. We oftentimes have families come in and we say, "Please cry anytime," and we say that too. Just as a family, I do think people have said to Paul and me, we've lost two of our four children at different times, 8 years apart. Our daughter Mary prematurely. Our son William had a chromosomal abnormality, and was only with us about an hour and a half before he passed away, and I always say we lost them very early on, right?
Hmm.
They were born, we spent a little bit of time with each of them. Mary, we had for 14 days. But I always tell people, I feel like I live in the land of what ifs, right? And what their lives would have looked like had they survived and what experiences they would have had. And I think about families who lose their children later on, or you losing your mother, when you were a teenager and you had those experiences over the past 15 years with her. But then you also look ahead and think, gosh, what would life have been? I feel like you live in that land of what ifs.
I think that's completely true, Martha. And I definitely think when it comes to losing children, you oftentimes think about what would they be like now? What at this
Mhm.
age, what would it have been like even when they started school, when they graduated fifth grade, all those different points in life that we think about. And I think that those are the things that we carry along with us, and that those are the silent things. They're kind of in our back pocket, and we're not always talking about them with our friends or our loved ones, but something that is just kind of we're going through in our head and can feel in our hearts too, and feel it and know it's always there. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, and it's yeah, and I'm at a point too where I've lived longer than my mom lived, and I'm now experiencing this whole different you know, experience of, wow, like every day feels like a gift, right? But then also recognizing who do I want to be in this time? And I think that those are all questions that we can ask ourselves in grief as well. Like who do I want to be as a mother, right? Who do I want to be as a friend? And I think those are important questions to ask ourselves.
Well, I know that you're making your mom very proud in the work that you are doing for
Oh,
so many, for sure. You are an expert in grief and trauma. I mean, all of your different experiences, the workshop facilitation, your expert witness testimony. Talk to us about the different types of grief.
absolutely. So I think, we obviously have different. I think grief in and of itself has varying types, right? Whether it's the kind of loss that we've experienced, the person that we've lost, parental grief, losing your child. I think that sibling bereavement. I think there are different aspects to each of those kinds of grief in and of itself, right? So understanding some of the different characteristics of losing a parent at a young age. Oftentimes you'll have this long arc. You have to experience the grief during certain developmental stages that are not just in childhood, over adulthood. As compared to sibling bereavement, which also has some similarities, but that oftentimes some of the losses are actually more towards the experience in the family and what that experience can be like as having that person who's no longer here and how it influences the family experience. So just in the kind who you loses matters. So another area of loss that's really important in grief to talk about is that there are other kinds of grief that many people don't even know about. And I see them both in the grief category, but also in the loss category. And there are two specific kinds I wanted to bring up right now. One is ambiguous loss. And Martha, I know you and I have talked a little bit about this and that the experience of ambiguous loss, but I think the best way to put ambiguous loss is that ambiguous loss is the kind of loss where it's the loss of expectation, the loss of what should have been. And that is such a common loss that so many people experience, and they don't have the word for what it is. And that is what it is. It's ambiguous loss. It's the loss of, if your child's in the NICU, it's a loss of how the birth experience should have gone, how it should have been for you, or what this young child's life should have been. And that is a loss and a grief experience in and of itself. There are other kinds of very commonly ambiguous loss. You'll see that with a child who maybe if one child's special needs, and maybe for the sibling of that child, that's kind of like in that sibling relationship. I remember that I went to a woman social work school who talked about this. That was her form of ambiguous loss, was that she had this sibling who had these different needs as a child, and it changed what it meant for her to be a child, what it meant for her to be a sibling, and so that was an ambiguous loss for her. So I think that's a helpful way to look at it and see it. And then you have disenfranchised losses. So kind of a little kind of sibling to ambiguous loss. And that's where people, either it's a quiet or silent or shamed loss. And so you don't bring it out into the public, or people don't recognize it. Miscarriage is a disenfranchised loss oftentimes, because people don't see what happened. They don't see that you experienced this loss. Sometimes also society imposes disenfranchised losses. One area I've seen disenfranchised loss is, let's say that, a child's dad dies and he was engaging in some criminal activity that led to his death. It's like, you're not allowed to grieve that because he was doing things he shouldn't be doing. And that's that you're disenfranchising that child from having the ability to grieve and to have lost that parent, and grieving the loss of that the love and the relationship that they had, regardless of any sort of actions. And so that's another area of loss that I think is really important to recognize. And they can sometimes come together. You can have, I think definitely probably in the I would definitely say that in the NICU world, I think you probably see both of these actually oftentimes. Sometimes if, you don't see so there's an ambiguous loss of what things should have been. And then outside, the world is not recognizing the loss you're having. So you're having both at the same time. And so I think that those are really important to understand and pay attention to, both as the griever, but also as the supporter on the outside, or the loved one on the outside, to know that that is something that it's going on as well.
I love this. This is the first time that I've heard this description of these types of losses. And I think you're absolutely correct. The disenfranchised and the ambiguous do somewhat walk hand in hand in a lot of different circumstances, because oftentimes in the NICU, people are certainly mean well, but oftentimes they may say, well, at least you can sleep at home because the baby's in the NICU being taken care of by the nurses, right? Or at least you have some time to yourself before the baby comes home. Or with miscarriage, at least you can get pregnant. At least the worst two words.
Never use that.
worst two words ever. But I do think there's a combination there. And when we talk to families, that ambiguous loss of what the experience they had hoped they would have, because no one wants to be in the NICU. Now, some people know that they have a higher likelihood of being in the NICU, or they may go into the maternal observation unit and know that they will most likely be in the NICU like we did. But that loss of what you think that experience would be, what recommendations do you have for families who are experiencing that? Are there any kind of, I don't know, self-care tips or things that they could do to help them get through each day?
Well, I think, first of all, just recognizing it and knowing what you're experiencing can give you some of that almost comfort to know that what you're feeling is normal, that it's okay. And I really think that is a first step with any grief. Just know you're not alone. Other people are feeling this. Other people are experiencing this as well. You're not doing anything wrong, right? This is what you're feeling is natural, and a natural response to what's happened to you. And that is okay. And so first of all, just start there. And then when it comes to self-care, giving yourself, like I said earlier, giving yourself grace is one of the biggest things you can do. If you're having a bad day, it's okay. You're having a bad day. If you snap at somebody, a loved one, somebody at the hospital, try better the next day, but it's okay. It's okay because what you're going through is more than we should have to go through, and I think understanding that and just giving yourself that time, um, finding little ways that you can take care of yourself, particularly whether that's getting outside and just walking around the hospital building and then coming back inside, whether that's, because obviously getting some fresh air, getting some sunshine, making sure to get, to pay attention like to the small things, just your actual bodily functions, right? Water, food, making sure that you're just taking care of yourself. All of those things play into our emotions and how we grieve and how we experience the loss. And then I think you can also utilize some of these experiences and try to share them with others. I think I think you have to understand that some people will never get it, and that's you just almost have to just like kind of maybe keep them at a kind of arm's length distance, maybe when you're going through this moment. But there may be folks who do get it, and if you can explain, it's the loss of what it should have been, right? And I'm not saying that, and I know all the at least don't say those, but it's what this should have been. Maybe if that friend had an experience that was, quote and put this quote, the normal experience, say, I should have had that normal experience. And I didn't. So I'm grieving that loss, the fact that I didn't have that. And I'll get through this. But I think also just explaining to others too, especially if you have a receptive, maybe loved one or friend, and that can help open up a conversation and somebody who understands what you're going through in that moment too, I think is really important.
And like you were talking about too, it is okay for you to step back. Sometimes people who are not in the NICU space do not understand at all what you are going through. And it's okay for you to step back a little bit, to not share all of the information.
Mhm.
We talk a lot about kind of whisper down the lane of text messages that you share with one person and then they try to retell the story and they retell the story and it never is accurate. And we, with Claire and Mary, really wanted to be in charge of the narrative that we were sharing. And so we started a Caring Bridge site. We did,
Mhm.
that was our release and our way of grieving and working through that grief was being able to share as much information as we wanted to and
Mhm.
people could subscribe to that and read what we wanted to share. But writing too, processing your grief through writing, and we have a
Mhm.
journal in our care package, that helped us a lot.
Yeah, journaling is a wonderful, wonderful way to kind of process what you're experiencing, and also it gives you something to look back at. And sometimes you need that. Sometimes you also want, both like you'll be amazed by what will come out with your pen that you wouldn't actually be able to articulate with your words. Like if you're speaking to somebody, sometimes your brain starts to kind of go on its own, and really things come out on the page that you didn't even realize you were feeling. And then it also gives you, like I said, something to look back at, both for reflection, but also I think sometimes to see, oh wow, I look at that so differently now that I'm a couple years out from this, like and it lets you see how you've been processing this over time too, and continue kind of almost an internal dialogue with yourself. But journaling is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And I think that even if carrying bridges can be a great way, obviously, like you're saying, to help make sure that everyone knows what's going on and that your story is being told by you. But if you can't do that, and you need a more private setting. Journaling is in and of itself is a great way. Great way.
Most definitely. Now, you and I had talked a little bit about mixed emotions with grief. What does that mean?
Well, it's really interesting how certain emotions can kind of live together at the same time. So it can be, you can have like this, I mean, you can have this experience of just profound grief, but also joy. I mean, and definitely, I think that, from a NICU setting, right? Profound grief, maybe like, loss of Mary for you while you're also fighting for Claire, and the joy of seeing her make strides every day. And so these emotions can live side by side. There can be guilt, guilt that I can't do this. I can't do this thing, what I need to do here, but then gratitude for somebody who is doing that for you, and so I think, and they can feel like conflicting emotions, but they're actually, it's so common to feel and to have two feelings live side by side, and making space for these really contrasting feelings.
I think that's a really good point, and certainly is relatable to anyone who's been in the NICU or is going through the NICU. And what comes to mind for me
Mhm,
talking about that is the day our son William was born.
mhm,
We knew he was going to pass away after he was born, and we were hopeful we'd have just a little bit of time with him. But we have so many photos of that day with joy on our faces of being able to hold him, and the girls
mhm.
dressed him and we sang happy birthday to him. And then a lot of tears, as you can imagine, because he was
Yeah,
only with us for an hour and a half before he passed away. So the conflicting grief and joy for sure was
mhm,
there for us that day, of trying to make the most of the short time that we had with our son and make sure that all he knew was love while he was with us.
yeah,
But that definitely makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
All right, talk to us. What is the biggest piece of advice you want to give to families right now?
It kind of flows out of that. I think that two things can be true. I really think that is so important, both from emotions you're feeling, but also example of is, like, I, you know, I lost my mother, but I have gained so much from that loss, that I'm able to put all that information into how I live my life, how I professionally, how I mother, how I parent, how I come to the table as a friend, a partner. I think that that's just in one example for me, but I think two things can be true. It can, something very bad can ride right along something very good. And I think sometimes it takes them a while to get there, because I'm not one of these. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, you're going to grow so much from this experience," and yes, that's probably true. There, you probably will, but when you're in the moment, that's the last thing you want to hear. So I think, but just knowing that two things can be true. You can be going through hell, but you know that you're going to get to the other side, and knowing those two things that can be true at the same time, and living with that moment and being in
Mhm.
that moment. The other piece but advice I would give is just, when somebody is using the at least, or saying the things you don't want to hear, just step away. I mean, really, like, sometimes some people they're trying their best, and where I'm from, we would say bless their hearts, but move along, like, kind of like, and protect your peace, stay with the people who really support you. Keep that crew around you, and sometimes let them also run interference with folks like that. Really lean in on the people who are there for you.
Well, Darcy, cannot thank you enough for being on the NICU Today podcast. Thanks for sharing about your experience of losing your mother. Thanks for giving us some great advice on navigating our own grief and loss. And just want to thank you again for being with us.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing, Martha.
Thank you for tuning in to the NICU Today podcast, brought to you by Today is a Good Day. Learn more at todayisagooddday.org.